Welcome back to another episode of the World Through Zen Eyes podcast. I'm Young Ansanim here with
Dr. Ruben Lambert.
and we are back for, I guess, part 2 of the loss, grief episode that we did last week. We did last week we talked about the view of loss and grief from it is as it is kind of perspective, if you will, the pure thusness of things. So everything's impermanent, yes, etc., etc. So these truths are true.
Yes.
And the thing is, you can handle the truth is the bit, right? So it's just because a thing is true. Well, I mean, that's, I think if there was ever an understatement, that's the one. Because I was going to say just because a thing is true doesn't mean, no, that's just because a thing is true means nothing for the most part in the practicalities of life, right?
Right.
The thing is true. Do people, for by and large, they say, I care about the truth, I want the truth, etc., etc. But it's such a extreme point of view, I think.
Very extreme.
Because the truth, not only is it pliable, or the smaller truths, the fixed truths are just so grand that sometimes living according to these truths in a day-to-day life is a very challenging thing, or at least we have to practice for it. Yeah. And that's sort of what we talked about last week, that prepare for the small, exercise the lens of perspective through which you look at life through those truths.
Right.
But that's I wanted to do a part 2 because I don't want our listeners to, in as much as the truths and that the points we made last week are of course valid, there are also things we need to fall back on, or at least approach it from a holistic perspective. And that is to say, unlike Yukcho Henung, the 6th patriarch, who declared, "Why are you all crying at the thought of my leaving this world? You're crying because you don't know where I'm going. I know where I'm going, so I'm cool as a cucumber."
Right.
And this is the thing.
That reminds me of a great book that you had back in the day. I think it was called Graceful Exits.
Right. I think it's in our library still.
It's there?
Yeah. It's the stories of masters from various traditions and how they exited the world. Yogis and Zen masters and
there's a great quote that reminds me of that moment, and it goes something like this: when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. When you die, the world cries and you rejoice. And so that sort of gives me that sensation of when you've lived your life in accordance with the principles and beliefs that aligned with your spiritual practice, and you've come to terms with your mortality or the impermanence of life, then you can go with some kind of grace and peace in your heart. When you've created many knots, when you haven't listened to our past podcasts on things such as karma and the way the laws of karma works, and you get to the very end, and at that very end, or like you were saying earlier, look at these small moments of impermanence, these small moments of loss of these external objects as as your practice ground to prepare yourself for the great loss, which would be of this carcass.
Right.
And so, yeah, we can take those things into account and exit.
Right. So let's call that the one approach, the
Yeah.
bearing in mind the reality of impermanence and practicing, really kind of solidifying that in our lives, because it's in everything, in everything.
Right. So let's dispel myths, because again, when we say impermanence, the first thing that comes to my mind is really having to explain and clarify that impermanence doesn't mean don't care, or impermanence doesn't mean when you have something,
Oh,
just
right, yes.
assume that, oh, I don't have to take care of it because it's already gone anyway, right?
Right.
So
Halfway in, halfway out.
one foot in and one foot out, because I really do think that, yes, impermanence means that things are in flux and things are changing, but it doesn't mean that within the birth and death, there aren't certain things that you should apply or you shouldn't
Sure.
take care of and nurture whatever object it is that holds some kind of value in your life at that very moment. That would not, someone that thinks, I'm living in accordance with the principle of impermanence and I care for no object, or everything that I have, I just,
Right.
treat it as if it's worthless. You wouldn't say that person is living in accordance with the Dharma, with the teachings of Zen.
Certainly not.
Right?
Yeah. It is, I think, perhaps for some of our listeners, the idea of someone taking impermanence and using it in that way, which is kind of, we could say, incorrectly, seems like, wait, there's no way. But there absolutely is a way, because you and I have both known either your people, let's just say, we've known people who have done that very thing. And I've heard others mention the same thing. Oh, I have such and such friend, and, he says he's Buddhist and he's, but his X, Y, and Z, and apart from the judgmentalness of the person retelling the story, mid-conversation, the point was exactly that. Someone has grabbed onto this principle of impermanence and turned it into don't care, and turned it into
something else that it's not.
Care for not anything. Everything's impermanent, so it's trash, it's gone, it's this and that, and it absolutely is not the way to use the principles.
Right. Real quick, I learned that lesson pretty early on in our journey into Zen with our teacher, our Unsanim, because I'll never forget, I just shared this story. It reminded you of the story the other day, but early on, I did hold a lot of these principles as idealistic principles, and I did hold them in my mind as extremes, like you're describing those certain individuals there. I think it's very common as a novice, right, or at the onset of your practice, to not be able to integrate all these principles into each other and see how they truly are practiced and turn them
They're
into
concrete and not
living,
fluid.
right?
Yeah.
Living teachings, right? Not things just on paper. And so we were going to a dump site to get rid of garbage from one of the houses that were cleaned because there was some construction going on, and we go and we dump everything into the giant warehouse. It's a giant warehouse full of garbage. And then we were all exhausted and tired and happy to get back into the truck. And as we sit down, one of them checks his pockets and says, I dropped my cell phone. Or someone dropped, or maybe someone else. It wasn't his.
It was
someone else.
Someone else. Yeah.
Okay, it was someone else.
Yeah.
And then, okay, It's a cell phone in a heap of garbage. All right.
Right.
All things
It's
are
all things
impermanent.
are
It
impermanent.
can't be attached to anything. All right,
Right.
we'll be gone and we'll just get a new
Our
one.
Zen
Right?
master, our Zen master
Our Zen
teacher
master's in
surely
here, right?
will just move on.
And then he goes, all right, let's get out of the car and let's look for it. Okay. Now, I'm not talking about like a dumpster. This was a warehouse of garbage, right? So,
Right.
so
It's
there
like
you
a
go.
dump site. Like,
Dump
you
site,
see
right.
mountains of trash.
Yep.
There was a bucket loader shuffling the stuff around.
Yep.
It's not, like you said, it's not a small thing. It's a mountain made of trash. Yeah.
So I was like, all right, let's go back. And we're in there digging through the garbage. After some time, and it's very interesting. This is why you need to have this, we say munsasu, this reflection on what's going on, right? Understand the teaching that's being implemented, apply it, and then you can get that insight from that moment. At that time, I didn't have it, but I remember digging through the garbage, and I found the cell phone. I was like, aha, I got it, right? And so, on one hand, it's like, why the wasted effort? But it wasn't a wasted effort.
Right.
Look at that. We went back there and we found it.
It
To me,
is.
now, that's wisdom, right?
Yeah. You say digging, through the garbage. Unsaniam, that's Unsaniam's one of his kind of things. He
Digging,
says,
digging.
dig. So when he gives a teaching, he says, I only give you seeds.
Right.
And I'll give you points. You have to dig deeper. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many other points to dig out of the
digging
story.
is big, right?
Yeah.
That's a big
So
one.
you're digging in
digging.
trash.
Yeah.
First of all, when the word trash comes to mind, the negative connotation of it comes to mind.
It's like a kojufanyo, right?
Oh,
That's
it's
your-
dirty. Oh, it's this. It's yucky. It's whatever. And they were oozing things, and it was trash, right? But it's the repulsion associated with having to dig through trash
Right.
was one point that Ansanim was making.
Right.
You're repulsed by the thing on account of this name, that it's trash. From the more refined standpoint, you're judging the things,
Right.
like and dislike, etc., etc. The other element is no mud, no lotus,
Right.
no trash, no cell phone.
Exactly.
So
Yes.
it's that kind of thing. So the other lesson is how much trash we had to kind of dig through and throw aside and shuffle through to find the thing that
value.
were of value, right? And so this is the same thing. How much our ponne, how much our worries and anxieties we keep shuffling through to get to the nugget of enlightenment, let's say.
Keep digging. Keep digging.
Keep digging.
Right.
And the expression of suheng, of putting the teachings into practice in our day-to-day lives, is exactly that. There's a stage when sometimes people get sort of stuck and bogged down at, which is the repulsion of their mind producing ponne, or producing worry. So they know, I shouldn't, I don't want to, but they're more that they are rejecting their ponne, their worries, their anxieties, their mind noise, the intrusive thoughts. The more they fight against it, the more plagued they become by it.
Right.
And it
It's
turns
like the
into a
quicksand
disease.
effect, right? The more you fight, the deeper you
Yeah.
sink.
And it becomes a sort of Zen disease, if you will. The wanting to rid oneself of the... And that's on account of some idea of repulsion. And
Right.
to understand the fact that suheng means it's not... Right, looking for the
into
end of it is problematic.
Yeah.
Ponne comes, throw it aside. Anger comes, throw it aside. Jealousy comes, throw it aside. Anger comes, throw it aside. Worry comes, throw it aside. Anxiety comes, throw it aside. Depressive thoughts come, throw it aside. You keep on digging and digging and digging. There's this sort of diseased state at times. It's like, when is it going to stop? When is it going to stop? And the thought, when is it going to stop, produces more of it.
More.
So maybe you've dagged to
Right.
90%. You only have 10% to go, but you start going, oh, this is so annoying. Oh, I can't. Oh, when is it going to stop? And you're filling up the heap again by your anxieties now associated with having anxieties. Your worries associated with having worries.
Yeah, it's almost
Your
like
anger with having anger.
Exactly. Which feels more. It
Right.
spawns a new child, a
Yeah.
bigger, stronger situation that has a greater grip on you.
Right. So it's
Wow.
this, this idea of like, you take a shovel, you throw it behind you, and it just kind of slips right back into the hole. This sort of cyclical reincarnating thing where you're just shuffling
Right.
for no end to be seen. So it is, we could say there's right effort, and this isn't one of those. But we digress.
Sure.
So,
How about the moment of passing? Because there's another lesson that I learned, and I hear you talk about it when we do our chondojes or achesas, this idea of death, right? And the perspective of there is no death. Death is just a new beginning, right? And so the way that this was taught to me and the way this example was highlighted to me was by burning Unsanem again. He burnt a stick of incense, and then he asked a question. As that stick burns, where did it go?
mm-hmm.
Is it gone? And that needs some munsasu or more introspection to really understand, is it truly gone?
Right.
Is it truly ever gone?
Was it truly ever to begin with? All
But
things are
we have to break
compounded
free.
things.
We have to break free from these habitual forms of viewing even the self or death.
Well, and again, so these are the elements of the truths and growing accustomed and exercising these principles. I think what is worth mentioning as a big element that is perhaps more readily available to people is that there is perhaps beyond, it's the similar principle, right? The idea of death or someone being gone is that the access is no longer. And so the mourning is the mourning. Oneself is mourning for the loss of the other person because they are now sort of as if it were denied access to that person. And with that denial of access, there is a helplessness, and that's perhaps the bigger element in loss of someone, is that we are helpless. If they were here in physical form and they had pain, I could tend to it. If they needed help and had fallen, I could help them get up, etc., etc. I can do something body to body. But now I have a body and I'm tethered to it. They no longer have a body, and so my sort of inability to be of use or of service or tending to them is the element of distress that I think comes with it. And so this is where, of course, perhaps not necessarily directly experienced by some, but this is where the power of prayer comes in. We are not helpless, and we are not hopeless, and we are not cut off. What we are cut off from, perhaps, is the receiving. If they were, say, a person who's here and then moves to the next town, and we have cell phone conversations, and something happens to my speaker in my phone. My microphone works, but my speaker doesn't. So I could talk, and they hear me, but when they talk, I cannot hear them. We could think of prayer in that way too. sometimes when we could get our speaker fixed and we could receive, right?
Right.
But until then, we have to remember that our microphone works. If the mind state is right, if the intention is true, prayer works. And it's the broadcasting. It's me broadcasting out the intention, the prayer, the whatever it is that you are intending to accomplish via prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And it provides us with the understanding that we are not sort of useless in the face of what's happened. We have, not only are we useful, it's advised that one exercises that. Simply because, we don't have maybe the speaker element to receive the thank you note, if you will. But things are affected in our lives anyway. So to that end, we have the prayer services that are associated with loss and associated with when someone passes.
Mm-hmm.
And, so this is our exercise of our power, and we'll have to view it as such. We have to view it as I have power still here in this moment. I have power that transcends my inability to receive the signals from the person who has passed, if we're sticking with this idea of cell phone and speaker and such. And so the chance to be effective and to petition on behalf of someone who has passed, we have to think of it as that we are not, like I said, disempowered by it. And so we have the 49-day service.
I was going to say, there's a window, the
Right.
opportunity, you're talking about an opportunity, there's a window that opens up at that time period.
Right. So
Which is what you're
traditionally
saying.
the 49-day
49
service, every 7 days or every day, depending on circumstances. But the traditional way is 49 days of prayer after a person has passed away. Every 7 days, a different element of their lives, a different element of their karma is inspected. And we, in a sense, function as a petitioner who petitions on behalf of the person who has passed to say, please acknowledge all the good things. And there are these lovely lines in some of the prayers. And basically the principle is, all right, let's say someone has seemingly led a life that was really let's just say not good. They were mean, they were selfish, they were this and this and that. And in a sense what we do, we say things like, there was this one time when this person was walking and their foot was about to land on an ant, and they purposely, consciously moved their foot in such a way that they will not step on said ant. See, we say, right? See, there it is. This is proof that this person fundamentally is not a selfish person, is not a careless person, is not a vile, vicious, murderous person. This person, fundamentally, at the core of their being, is a good person who doesn't want to even step on an ant. The conditions, the upbringing of their lives, the childhood, the traumas, the this, the that, the confusion, the misunderstanding, the ignorance, may have led them to do X, Y, and Z things, but the person themselves is still the person.
Right.
And so out of that, we have these sayings. There are no good people. There are no bad people.
Right.
There are only good and bad actions.
Sure.
And this is, we we have a karmic burden with which we have to carry, and we have to somehow appease, and we have to somehow process and digest. But we're not alone in that, as we are not in our living days, not alone. We have Doban, our friends on the path. We have parents and teachers, etc., all trying to bring light into the unenlightened parts of our psyche and our mind. Everyone's got pockets of ignorance and pockets of darkness, therefore, in their mind, simply of not understanding or being confused about a thing or other. And the why, there are multitudes of why, that is.
Yeah.
But so when we pray, we are petitioning on behalf of this person to say, we kind of highlight the best in the person. We petition the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. Even the Shiwang, the guardians or the emperors or the kings. Wang is a king. So the 10 kings, if you will, or the 10 emperors of the hell realms, none of them want us to be there. This is the different kind of view from, say, this, this demonic ruling monstrosity who wants you to burn.
Just banish you for all eternity.
Burn and suffer and blah, 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 and takes joy out of it. Shiwangnim don't want you to go to the bad places. Right?
Yeah.
And so their tendency and their lean is towards what can we do for not to have this happen. Jijang Bosal stands at the gates of hell realms and trying to grasp and get people out. Amitabha presides over the thing. Inloang Bosal's there providing the, transportation services, etc., etc. And the whole pantheon of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who at all times tend to the welfare of beings. And depending on the realm, which bodhisattva oversees whichever realm we are in, whether it's the earth realms or the heavenly realms, also whichever subdivision, right? So human beings, there's a representative, right? Animal realms, we have a representative, if you're, etc., etc. So the whole arrangement is in such a way that we are not left, we are not abandoned in a sense. And we are always with a magnificent support network. We have to plug into it. Right? We have to connect to the network. We have to have some relationship with said Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, etc., etc. But whether on this side or that side or whatever other side or in between or wherever, we have that available to us. So the destitute, the abandonment, the powerlessness are manufactured only because of our sensory perception is pathetically limited. We can only see the things that our eyeballs can see.
Right.
And
funny about that,
badly.
Yeah. Whenever there are like earthquakes and storms, you always hear those stories of certain animals like toads and things like that heading for the high hills, and then you hear human beings, mocking animals as to how dumb they are. But then in those moments, I look and I'm like, damn,
yeah,
here it comes, and things literally have to be right in front of, underneath our nose for us to register it. And you have these animals
Yeah.
that are fleeing way long before the human even begins to register that something is happening.
And and if that were only so,
and that's not even the
right.
extent of what is.
If that were only so,
Yeah.
because that then suggests that, the fermentations of the mind of an animal who perceives the subtle signals that earthquake or a tsunami is coming, or a storm is coming. We are so, as human beings, preoccupied with other things. I mean, if you have hair, right, it's a simple example. If you have hair, and I think people with long hair, and women in particular, might know, frizzy hair day, right? It is an antenna perceiving the state of the world around us, right? But it's viewed as like, oh, my hair looks bad. It's a frizzy hair day, right? But the conditions,
they should look up to the sky.
right? But the conditions of which, I mean, it's a sort of barometer, thermometer. It's a whole weather station. If you consider, wait a minute, why? And frequently before, the more significant change happens. So, a toad or a snake perceiving the thing, they're like, all right. The moment they perceive, it's like, all right, I'm out of here.
Right.
Get out of Dodge. And if human beings were only so smart, because we have sirens go off, right? Warnings go on the radios. Your phone starts, beeping and alarms going off, and still we have people who would say,
too smart.
"Nah,
Yeah.
I'm not moving.
Right.
I'm not going to evacuate. This is, I built this house," or whatever it is.
It's like
you built the house, is true. You could rebuild another house. The only thing is you can't rebuild your life when you lose it. But that's the thing. So the perception is pathetically limited.
And to an extent, because of that limited perception, that is a cause of human beings suffering.
Right.
Right? Because they truly cannot see.
Yep.
And so because they cannot see, they assume there's nothing there.
Yes. Cannot see, cannot hear, cannot smell, cannot taste, cannot touch. All of these sensory experiences are attuned to living in this very world in which we live in. And they're finally attuned to the necessary spectrum. So our visual ability is attuned to a necessary spectrum.
Very specific.
Very specific. It's not going to
Object
see
that it picks up.
right. Because imagine if we were in our day-to-day lives, you're walking around and you're sort of swatting as if you were at a mosquito or bee or a fly, but you're swatting at your AM waves and your FM waves and your radio waves and your cell phone waves and your Bluetooth waves and all these things flying in front of your nose. You couldn't operate in a day-to-day world. So the transcendence of these, let's call them grosser perceptions, is a possible thing. But the more important element is, once you transcend it, the control over it. Because having an ability to perceive a thing and not knowing where the on and off switch is, and not knowing when to turn it on or off or dim it or whatever, that's another, we could say, affliction. One is afflicted by extrasensory perception, let's call it that.
Sure.
But that's the thing, because we are attuned in the way that we are attuned, naturally speaking, and on top of that, the cacophony of thought, want, desire, dislike, a heap of garbage is vile and stinky and dirty, and face and nose get crinkled while digging through it to find a cell phone, etc., etc. All of those things add to our blindness. But we have to imagine, at least at the initial stages, we could say imagine, we could say believe, that there's an efficacy that we are not deprived of once somebody leaves this world. And so I encourage anyone who's lost somebody, of course, to pray. You have the power within that. And so we have the 49-day services, which is the traditional kind of right after the passing. We have the 1 year. We have the 3 year. Those are the big kind of chondoje inspections, if you will. And of course, we have the annual, whether it's Pekchung, the ancestral service, or the annual dates, the memorial dates for each individual person. They are simultaneously tending to the welfare of the person who has passed, say my father, my mother, grandpa, grandma, what have you. But they are also simultaneously bettering our circumstances here. Because we are not attuned, unless we develop attunement, I sometimes make the illustration of a flowering tree branch that you've cut that's outside your house, and you bring it home and you put it in a vase, and they are cut off. It's a severed limb of the tree, and it's now in a vase. Not only is it now no longer attached to the tree, but it's also not even in the same space. This one's inside, tree is outside, and when the tree blooms, this thing blooms also. They're severed, but they're blooming. And then we have these, these principles of
sounds like quantum
entanglement.
mechanics.
I was just going to say, yes, the entanglement.
Spooky stuff at a distance.
Yeah, and all of those things. So these things are, we are not left powerless. This is an important thing to remember. To a large degree, the suffering comes from simply our limitations. It doesn't come from this circumstance. It doesn't come from the situation that has transpired. It comes from my limitation of either access or understanding, right? If I can see the person who's passed, I would feel differently. But I can't see. If I could hear them, I would feel differently, but I can't hear them. If I know where they went, I would at least to some degree be appeased and comfortable knowing the way that, I moved here from Poland. Like you said, and then when I was moving from there, grief there was a real experience for the people left behind. Rejoicing on the account of the part of the family that I had here upon my arrival.
But now let's take that, for example, and kind of connect it as a practical example of a Sashikuja ceremony. What I just thought in my mind was, when you were leaving Poland, you had to depart. Where were you going to? So your mother, who loved you and cared for you, didn't just send you to America and say, ta-ta, figure it out all on your own.
Right.
They partitioned on your behalf. They contacted someone in the United
The
States,
receiving part of the
right?
family. Yeah.
And said, "Hey, I'm sending you precious cargo here.
Mhm.
Here's my boy, something that I value the most in my life.
Right.
Please think
And
about
she wouldn't
X,
send.
Y, and
Right.
Z. Keep this in mind.
Mhm.
You know, at night he likes he doesn't like a silky blanket. He likes a furry blanket. He likes his eggs scrambled. Right?
Right.
You know, whatever it is, right? You know, he has to be in school and educated. He has to be taken care of.
Right.
And not only does the mother contact the United States, they also send you with a care package too.
Mhm.
Right? If you're going to go on this long journey, here are some of the things that you need to take with
A
you.
suitcase of karma.
Suitcase.
Suitcase of
Right?
karma.
You know?
Suitcase of prayers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe on the day that you depart, it's not just her there to see you off. She calls other family members who also cared for you too, and some friends to further support, right? That could be the Sung, the Sangha on this side, especially on certain days, on Baekchun, when we all gather together in support of all the Yonga, all of the departed souls, right? So,
And then, mind you, right, she contacts specific persons of power and ability to furnish me with said necessities of life.
right.
She's not contacting a homeless guy under a bridge who has no blanket to say, hey, you know, he likes blankets, like you said, a fairy blanket and scrambled eggs. She contacts someone who can provide those things.
Just like a pilot who will...
Well, that's why we contact Amitabha,
Well,
the Buddha of the heavenly realm, to say, my so-and-so is leaving this world. He likes a furry blanket and scrambled eggs, right? Because we know Amitabha has the power to provide the necessary things. We know the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas we are contacting have the ability to care for, to further care for the person who's traveling over there. The other element to consider is the verbiage. You said when I was leaving Poland, I was departing Poland. Right? And this is where truth, not truth, and the relative truth and the ultimate truths, kind of how you look at it. Because to say, oh, he's departed Poland, right? The only people that say that is the people on the departing side of this transaction. Because if the departing and arrival, let's say, were instantaneous, right? You're departing, but simultaneously arriving. You're arriving, simultaneously departing. And so in the Yumagyong Sutra, famously the first interaction with Yuma goes out, and one of the bodhisattvas who comes, he says, oh, you've come without having departed. You've arrived, or you've arrived without having left. You know, that kind of thing. To say the idea of departing and arrival are separate. The idea of arriving, having departed, are so rooted in the matter of this world that is geographically organized and rooted and pinned down. You have to depart from one thing to get to another thing. It is part and a way of operating and a way of seeing and experiencing and of this very world of matter and form. When we talk about the other realm of existence, it's a matter of whether the departing or arriving can be viewed from the perspective of the realm of form, the geographically bound type of thing. But what if the departing is simultaneously arriving and arriving is simultaneously departing? Then the departing and arriving, in a sense, cancel one another out. And therefore there is no departing and no arriving. And this is the idea of birth and death. We are in this life already reincarnated. We have departed the womb of the mother and its watery environment. And then we've entered into the airspace of this world, and then we've taken the breath and went from swimming kind of breaststrokes in the womb of the mother to then being born into this world. And so the departing and arriving, or the birth and death, we have died to the watery abyss of the womb of the mother while simultaneously being born into this world that we are now in. They're one and the same in a sense, and yet they're not one and the same. And this is where we run into these troubles of viewing a world which abides differently. And I'm no physicist, but my rudimentary understanding is, or perhaps the way I like to see it is, when we look at the general sort of Newtonian physics of matter and big things and the way they behave, and then we look at the quantum world and the way that things behave there, they do not behave in the same way. They behave very strangely on the quantum side of things than they do on the grosser, bigger, elemental realm, on this side, if you want to call it that. And so to try and apply or try and view the behavior of things on a quantum level from and abide by the rules that are here is a matter of fixation or arrogance or inflexibility or refusal to understand that the rules and regulations there aren't the same that are here. And this is akin to, let's say, I came from Poland to here, and I refuse to learn the language. I refuse to learn the rules and regulations. I refuse to abide by the laws on account of some stubbornness. Imagine the kind of life I would have. Right. So it's not the right way to look at it. We have to understand that there are realms and dimensions which are governed by different sets of rules and regulations and laws, and try to understand it. If we can understand it, at least understand that I don't understand. It is the most honest way to look at it. Understand that I don't understand. Do not try in the stubbornness of your human mind to enforce your understanding upon realms that are beyond your understanding. You will suffer because you won't create. You're not a god. You're not a creator entity that's going to enforce a change of rules. So the sooner we come to terms with that there are things that we understand and things that we don't understand, and to be able to remain then pliable in the idea that things are different there, so I mustn't look at them from a perspective that I'm looking at life now. It is a big help also. But as all of our listeners surely heard the alarm clock go off, so 45 minutes have gone by. If you have questions or topics that you would like to suggest, we'd love to have you do so. They really do make it a little bit more connected and alive. A person has a question because that question is a living question in them. Otherwise, we have to suppose and imagine that these people want to know this or that, and or we should share this and that, and it makes it more fun to be sort of imagining an interaction that we are having here in the studio with those who are listening. So do please send us further topics, questions, and of course, if you'd like to, perhaps you notice that we've ran out of the little feedback recordings that we would insert before the podcast. Those were lovely. We got a number of them. If you've already done one, you're welcome to do another one. Certainly your thoughts on perhaps specific podcast episode, or the generally speaking the podcast itself, or you could just share how you feel about it, or try and entice perhaps a future listener or a new listener to say, well, maybe you could benefit from this, maybe that you find it interesting or comedic or whatever. So that's our time. I'm Young Ansenim.
I'm Dr. Ruben Lambert.
Take care of yourselves and each other.
If you like what you hear, subscribe and like. And also, if you enjoyed our podcast today, well, pass it on, pay it forward, and share it with someone else. There's great lessons here to be learned by everyone. Thank you.